You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is about when toxic in-laws' opinions become your prison.
Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on.
Hi, Miriam Susan, your host here today to talk about when the opinions of our toxic in-laws becomes a mental prison that we end up living in. Today's scripture reference is from the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 2, and this is the New Revised Standard Version Catholic edition. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I want you to imagine this scenario. You are in bed, you're lying awake, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you are replaying that conversation that you had with one of your in-laws from a few days ago. You're mentally going through what was said, what you should have said, and what you could have done differently. And your stomach either is in knots or you're feeling butterflies and you feel like a tightness or a heat in your chest because you know this in-law, whether it's your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your sister-in-law, brother-in-law, you know that they disapprove of how you discipline your kids, or how you keep your house, or how you cook, or how you don't cook, or how you work or you don't work. Whatever it is, and fill in the blank of all these things that our in-laws don't approve of us for. But here's the real question for you. Why does this person's opinion have so much power over your peace? Why does it? So here's a hidden truth. Most of us don't realize that we have handed over the keys to our emotional well-being to people who may never approve of us, who may never like us, who we will never be enough for. We are living our life as if their validation, their approval, their stamp of I like you or I actually love you is like the oxygen that we need to breathe, that we desperately need it for our survival. This can look a lot of different ways in your life, but these are some common ways that this kind of plays out in our lives. One of them is that you're constantly second-guessing your parenting choices after they come to visit. Or you're constantly second-guessing how you set the table, what you fixed for them to eat when they were there. It's a feeling of being physically sick when you know they're coming over. For me, it was butterflies. I never got butterflies when I would go to see my parents. And it wasn't like good butterflies. It was always anxious butterflies in my stomach, or a feeling of tightness in my chest, or even I tend to carry a lot of my stress in my upper back and neck. And so I'd feel it just at the base of my head and radiating down into my neck. And then as it got worse, it radiates up and around my head. It can also look like you changing your behavior, how you dress, how you fix your house, how you dress your children, even the words that you say in a way to try to win the approval that will never come. And this is a completely exhausting cycle. You try harder, you get criticized anyway, you get the jabs anyway, you try even harder, and then it's still never enough. There is this uncomfortable reality check that we as Catholic wives need to be making to not allow us to become prisoners of our thoughts because of how our in-laws view us. So some people, they will never ever give you what you're hoping for. And that, my dear friends, is not about you. We have been conditioned to believe that being a good wife means keeping everybody happy. But here is something that very, very few people talk about, and that's why I'm talking about it. You cannot control their thoughts. You cannot control their opinions. You cannot control their reactions. You cannot control whether they love you or like you or not. You cannot control your in-laws. So this becomes a prison that we build when we need their approval to feel okay about ourselves. Now, this scripture that I read from Romans today reminds us that we can be transformed by the renewing of our minds, by not conforming to what other people expect of us. The person whose opinion matters is God. Hopefully, the opinion of your spouse matters, and somewhat of your children, but it depends on how old they are. Really, it's your spouse and it's God. Those are the opinions that matter. Again, we're going back to this topic that I bring up so often in my episodes, which is the proper order of a Catholic family. And that is God first, your spouse second, your children third, and then the whole rest of the world comes after. If you're not concerned about your children's approval, you for sure should not be concerned about your in-laws' approval. If you're not concerned about what your neighbors think about your yard, if they don't like the color of the flowers that you have because it clashes with the color of your house, then the opinion of your in-laws should matter at that same level. Obviously, it would be wonderful if our in-laws did love us unconditionally, if they did approve of the way we lived, if they just approved of us just in general. But then we wouldn't be together at this moment right now, would we? So what is the cost? What is the cost of thinking this way? What is the cost of caring so much about what our in-laws think about us? What happens when the in-laws' opinions become our measuring stick on how we gauge how our life is? We can begin to lose touch with the God who created us and the wife and mother and sister, parishioner, just a Christian that God created us to be. Our children, when we are striving to receive that approval from our in-laws, will see us and see that we are anxious, see that we are stressed and overwhelmed, instead of being at peace, confident, joyful in the role of being their mother. Our own marriages will suffer because we are focused on managing the feelings of our in-laws instead of building our own families. And then we become a people pleaser instead of a God pleaser. And this has a ripple effect because when we are seeking the approval of somebody that will never give it to us, it affects other parts of our life. It doesn't just affect that relationship. It has a ripple effect, like that drop of water that lands in the middle of a pond and that ripple goes out further and further from that point. That's what happens. It starts to affect, of course, our relationships, but it affects our peace, it affects our joy, it affects our sense of self, and they all become dependent on people, again, that will never be satisfied no matter what we do. I'm going to offer you some questions to just sit with this week and really think about, am I striving for the approval of people who will never give it? And maybe we're seeking their approval because we don't have the best relationship with our own parents. And I know many of us go into our marriages thinking, okay, this family, maybe you were under the belief that they were a wonderful family, that they were loving and accepting you, and then something happened along the way. But maybe you came into the marriage because the relationship you have with your own parents is fractured and is not that great. And maybe it's something that's similar to mine. So I grew up in a non-Christian home, an a-religious home. There was never any speaking about religion. And I thought, wow, now I get to see what a Christian family is like, because I had none of that modeled to me. But I went in with these expectations of thinking that things were going to be a certain way, and then they absolutely did not turn out that way. If you're in that situation, be aware of it. Be aware that maybe you are seeking the approval of your in-laws because you didn't get that in your family of origin. So here are some questions that I'm going to offer to you to really sit and think on this week as you consider, are you doing things solely to seek the approval of your in-laws? Are you making them extra special gifts? That was my thing. I loved making very special gifts. Gifts are my love language. I like to go above and beyond for gifts, really thoughtful gifts. And then they were just discarded, given back to our family, whatever it was. I was never going to get their approval by spending all the time that I did on those gifts. But here are the questions that I want to offer to you this week. Whose approval am I desperately seeking? And why? Why are you seeking the approval? If it's anybody but God, then it's time to really sit and think about it. Why am I seeking their approval? And then what would change if I truly believe their opinion of me doesn't define my worth? First of all, it doesn't. Even if your in-laws think highly of you, it still doesn't define your worth. Only God can define your worth. He created you. He's the only one that can make that decision of what your worth is. And then, am I conforming? Am I changing? Am I shifting my behaviors to their expectations? Or am I being transformed by God's truth about who I am? Please remember that your worth isn't up for debate in their private house, behind their closed doors. It's not up for debate. It was settled long before you ever met them. By who? By our Creator. God bless you. Go in peace. Now that we've wrapped up today's episode, I could really use your help. If this message resonated with you, would you take just 30 seconds to leave me a review? Reviews are how other Catholic wives can find this podcast, and you know how much we all need to know that we're not alone in this challenging journey. Your review might be exactly what another woman needs to realize that she's not crazy. It takes just a few seconds, but makes a huge difference. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. But before you go, I want you to know something. If you're feeling exhausted after every family visit, questioning whether you're overreacting, or if you're replaying conversations you had with your in-laws for days afterward, you're not crazy, and you're definitely not alone. I've created a free guide called 5 Signs You're Not Too Sensitive, What Your Gut is Really Telling You, that will help you to understand why these interactions feel so hard and give you some gentle scripts to use in those moments when you're caught off guard by your in-laws. You can grab a copy at desiringpeace.com/signs. That's desiringpeace.com/SIGNS. You're not asking for too much when you ask to be treated with respect. I'll talk to you next week. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.